Okay, everyone, thanks for coming out, which I say every time as I turn a lot. As you know, I'm very fidgety, but today's very interesting. As you've been reading the book, and I have a mic, look at that. I hope it works well because my voice doesn't really sound good on tape, but it doesn't matter. You have to listen to me. So behind me, if you can see the picture, these are some Venezuelans in Bogota. Obviously, Venezuela is having a huge crisis right now, and we can talk about that and debate it. Is it because of sanctions? Is it because of bad governance? Is it because of the resource curse, Dutch disease, as you've been looking at? And it's all of the above. So it has a huge crisis. One of the things, though, is what to do with refugees, what to do as you watch the Myanmar video, a documentary, which I give to a number of classes, which is very interesting. And this is where we get into what in the book calls positivism. Positivism, in the sense, if you take my empirical inquiry, statistics, or research methods, is a little different. It's about cause and effect, etc. When we apply it to international law, as the book states, positivism stresses the state. It brings the state to the unit of analysis, that the state has certain legal rights. And this is where we get into the issue of state rights over humanitarian rights. This is going to be the biggest thing. And then you have a little thing about the local, rights over other rights. This is a debate without society. I mean, in the United States, we have a federalist government. When Obamacare passed, other states, more conservative states, said, we're not going to listen to this. We're a sovereign state. We're going to take Obamacare to the Supreme Court. Then when Trump became president, the more lefty states, like where I'm from, Massachusetts, said, we're going to take the federal government to court. We don't like Trump's policies. We're going to do, Massachusetts has more, say, sanctuary cities than any other state in the country until, California became a quote unquote sanctuary state. But they don't want to listen to the federal government when they don't agree. And then they listen to it when they do agree, because the governor, who's been Republican in Massachusetts, is very center left and supports Obamacare, etc. What's the point of all this? The point is it's the same in humanitarian rights. And this is what the book stresses. The positivism, bringing state as the unit of analysis, that's the one that really determines what happens in the international system, will decrease humanitarian international law, because they will say this is our eternal problem. That's what the junta of Myanmar says. That's what even the former Nobel Prize winner said. And there was movement to take away her Nobel Prize because of this. And this is what's happening all over the world. So you have the refugee crisis in Venezuela. What do you do with these refugees? And if you take a positivist stance, it is the state that has the right to do what they want to do. So like Turkey can kick out the United Nations refugee agency if they're setting up camps, etc., because this is Turkish property. We don't have to deal with the Kurds, the Syrians, etc. This is our rights. The other argument is that there's something called natural law. People have natural rights, and those cannot be trampled on regardless of the state. So these two things are in tension, the state rights versus humanitarian rights. We have the right to deal with our people or people coming into our borders the way we want to. And then you get into the whole entire thing of genocide. Genocide is basically would eliminate that idea that the state has rights, because the word genocide in and of itself connotes that the international community has a certain right. And so does the international community have the right to go into Myanmar, Bangladesh, where they're going, etc., to help these people? And that's where it's funny, most people who study international law, or maybe some, don't understand the role of discourse. And that goes with law in general. Once you say, if you said Rwanda, what happened, because you're going to be reading about those certain special tribunals, and one is in Rwanda. If you say tribal warfare, then there's no responsibility of the international community to go in and help. So international law changes right there. If you say tribal warfare. If you say genocide, it becomes a legal issue that an international community has to get involved. So it's really also how you define these cases. And this is important. So what's going on in Venezuela is very, very important. Obviously, it's not genocide, but do states have the right to do what they want to do with the Venezuelan refugees? Or is it an international issue? And remember, look at the word I just said, refugee. That's different from immigration, and that's certainly different from illegal. If you are very conservative, you might say, oh, these people are illegal. They're not supposed to be here. Now, I'm not just talking about Venezuela. I'm talking about like in the United States, Costa Rica, and the Nicaraguans that go there, etc. So the idea is what a person is, discourse matters. So if you call a person a refugee, that connotes that the international community and the state itself has a more positive role to deal with these people. If you call them immigrants, or even less, like illegals, then, oh, they're lawbreakers. So international law and even domestic law, domestic immigration law, determines a lot on how we just use a label. And that's extremely important. So, positivism, the idea that the state has the main role in the international community, decreases significantly right when you say the word genocide. And it also decreases significantly when you say the word refugee, because now we have to deal with these people in different ways. And that's how you have to start thinking about not just international law, but if you want to study law in general, discourse, the arguments that take place matter. Even when you look, if you watch, I do this in a few classes, the O.J. Simpson trial there, the one with John Travolta on Netflix. It might be funny to talk about it in an international law class, but look at how they tried to socially construct, that is, create meaning and imagery on O.J. Simpson. Is O.J. Simpson a wife beater? And then he killed his wife, or is he a victim of racism? This is exactly what lawyers have to deal with. So when you look at the what was going on in Bosnia Herzegovina in the former war in the war in the former Yugoslavia that broke up, obviously, or if you're looking at Rwanda, how we define that. Is Rwanda, the Hutu and the Tutsis, genocide, tribal warfare? Or is it, as we're going to see, like, for example, with the Rios Montt case, that's a Guatemalan dictator who committed genocide against the indigenous people. Their argument was this was just war. That's what happens in war. But it could be genocide against the indigenous people. So this is something you really have to take seriously, is discourse, how we define things. So when you look at the Guatemalan case with Rios Montt, where he, in my opinion, committed genocide against the indigenous people, his daughter, who's married to a Republican congressman, says, hey, that was war. People die in war. Turks say the same thing about the Armenians. Right? Hey, back in World War I, what happened? That was the negative externality spinoff of war. People die. It's terrible, but people die. It wasn't genocide. This is what humanitarian law is all about. And then you get into other issues like does, say, for example, in war, the United States have the right. I'm looking back in World War II, and we debate this in a few classes, which is very interesting. Did they have the right to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki with all those innocent people dying? That's something for you to think about. But this is what I think humanitarian international law is all about. So it's not just about, okay, this is a clear-cut case. It's how we define these cases, because someone might say this is a clear-cut example of genocide. Another person might say, no, this is just revenge. This is just war. This is just, tribal warfare that happens all the time. So right when you say tribal warfare, then there's a racial thing. Oh, that's Africa doing what Africa does. Just like in the League of Nations, when Haile Selassie went to the League of Nations, there's a certain race component there. I think a lot of people were racist against Africa, so they didn't get involved. And race does take a play. Obviously, in genocide, race is very important. So if Rios Montt in Guatemala committed genocide, they're obviously racist against the indigenous people. And that's something else you have to prove. So it's very interesting about international humanitarian law. To what extent can the international community do anything on this. It's not just now how we define it. It's what is their role and what can we do. In the former Yugoslavia, NATO bombed Serbia, Montenegro. That was not popular with obviously the Serbians in the Montenegro, and we have a big Serbian population here. And I'm speaking from Tempe, Arizona. In Arizona, and I have them in classes, and they say, no, we weren't the only ones. We were victims too, etc. But it was very interesting how NATO bombed Serbia and Montenegro, and to stop what they saw was genocide in Bosnia and Herzegovina and by the Croats as well. Sarajevo was just destroyed during that war in the early 1990s when Bill Clinton was president. But the question becomes, what would Russia do then? Because Russia is a big supporter of the Serbs. So you have a lot of different issues. Now you bring in another issue, like you take the former Yugoslavian case, where the United States got involved with NATO. That's muscle diplomacy force. You have to do something. This is an international community issue. It's genocide. And then you have the United Nations stepping involved, et cetera. And then you have these tribunals to try these people for humanitarian crimes. But the question is, as we hark back to positivism, what would Russia say about this if it had the power during that time? Remember when Russia fell after the Cold War, it was, basically poor, indebted, etc. But now it's rising its head, and it would not deal with an issue like that. The same with China. Remember, we accidentally bombed and I'm sure we did do it accidentally. I don't think it was a problem by the Chinese embassy in Serbia, in Belgrade. So the point there is, what would China's response be now? And this is where you get, if we go in, should we go into Myanmar the same way with NATO? And remember, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, for the people who don't know, that was just a Cold War tool to balance the Soviet Union and to get European powers and Turkey on our side. But now it's being used by the United States and the European Union in wars like the former Yugoslavia, Afghanistan. And should we use it in places like Myanmar and say to the junta, you have to stop this, etc. And we're going to carve out a little piece of land for the Rohingya. Sorry, my very gringo, my pronunciation is horrible. But for the people being killed in genocidal attacks, what do we do in these cases? And what does humanitarian law force us to do? Remember, and I this was, I think, a question on a quiz or the midterm about the Nuremberg trials after World War II. These were very, very important for humanitarian issues. Same with the Eichmann case that I want to say Mossad got. Israel in general brought back from Argentina. And there's actually evidence from someone said that they saw Joseph Mengele, one of the most horrific Nazis that conducted experiments on twins, but they had a focus on Eichmann because that was the goal. And Mengele escaped, and if memory serves, he went to Brazil and Paraguay and lived out his life. He was one of the most horrific people on the planet. But this is the thing that I want you to start focusing on with humanitarian law. And for the final paper, we do actually, I think it's not a long paper, like 6-7 pages or something like that, depending on the course. So read the syllabus, but it's pretty interesting. You have to pick a case. You're welcome to pick a humanitarian case. Any of these tribunals you're reading in the book, Rwanda, Libya, Lebanon. I think there's some, obviously Yugoslavia and stuff. So remember, there's this tension for forever. It's the state versus and the state rights versus, and this is the civil rights era too. Don't forget the 1960s. It's not just, international law, it's federal and state law. But in this international class, it's basically what does the state able to do and what can international community do? And a lot of states always say, hey, this is a state rule. The same thing why we're not in the ICC. Colin Powell came out and said, hey, during this time, and said, we have the best justice system in the world. We don't need the ICC. Look at the My Lai massacre. We tried those people. That was in Vietnam and stuff. So, states are always saying Mexico is big and nationalist. This is a problem of our state. So countries usually do, focus on the state. So thanks for listening to this. Remember, the goal here is positivism, like you read in the book, related to humanitarian law. To what extent does the state itself have rights, and to what extent does the international community have rights? And discourse matters, whether we call it tribal warfare or genocide, or just, the negative externality of war. What is this issue of intervention, and when, as the book talks about, is just intervention? And I want you to really think about that. So thanks a lot for coming out, everyone. I hope everyone does well in the midterm, and everyone stay safe, because COVID is still out there and increasing. Of course, I got my vaccination, my vacuna, 2 of them, and I didn't even die in the second one. I thought it was the what do you call it? The side effect of the second dose was death, because I'm very neurotic, so I think the worst. So when I don't die, I'm all excited. In fact, I didn't get any side effects, which is pretty interesting. So take care, everyone, and stay safe.